This is a Martin B-57 bomber. Hundreds of this type of aircraft flew with the United States Air Force Tactical Air Command in various bombing and other related functions for over 2 decades of successful service. The model also served in the air forces of Taiwan and Pakistan, and in both cases, as with those in the U.S. service, saw combat with distinction over the skies of Vietnam and during the Indo-Pakistani Wars. They were the last of a long line of bombers built by the Martin Company, a lineage including the famous B-26 Marauder of World War II. When the production of the B-57 ended, the company went out of the aircraft manufacturing business to concentrate on missiles and the burgeoning space industry. While the B-57 fits perfectly into a specific United States requirement, it was actually designed by the British and was one of the first overseas combat aircraft to be brought to the Air Force since the First World War. The reason for this was simple: speed and availability. The new plane was to fill parameters that were first identified with other aircraft less than 10 years before. Let's begin with a rare insight into the program by learning about how it was adapted from an insider, a pilot who oversaw the U.S. version of this remarkable aircraft.
Somewhere in early 1962, I was working on the NX-2, which was going to be a nuclear-powered airplane. I'd been working on it, and my boss told me Friday afternoon, when you come in Monday, go see Mr. Rogers, that'd be Herb Rogers, in advanced design or preliminary design. I forget what they called it in those days. And he will have an assignment for you. Okay. So I went over there, and Mr. Rogers, who I'm delighted to say is still with us, just a terrific gentleman, a man I admire enormously. He explained to me the Air Force has decided to give us a contract to rebuild long-wing B-57s, the reconnaissance versions. Now, at that time, it was the RB-57D, or Delta. And he said, you know, there was a structural problem with one at Albuquerque. The wing basically sort of broke and almost fell off on landing rollout when the lift loads died away, and the Air Force doesn't want to fly them anymore. And they said we ought to rebuild the wing, and using our B-58 honeycomb skin technology and so forth. And Rogers said, you know, I think we could do better than the D model. I said, well, I'm sure we could. He said, well, hop to it. The ground rules were, as best I remember them, keep as much of the fuselage structure as you can. The landing gear tie points and the gear must be retained. Keep as much of the tail as you can. Put any engines you want on it, and redo the wing, however you think it ought to be. Also, the nose from the pressure bulkhead forward, it's so long, so big, weighs so much, the CG's here, and you'll never know what's in it. The whole idea was high altitude, maybe an air sampling airplane, I don't know. I'm assuming that was some of the purposes. But basically high altitude recon. We don't care how fast it goes as long as it goes high. And we're talking well over 60,000 feet now. Don't worry about range. If it goes high enough, it'll go far enough. That was basically what we were given to work with. So one of the first things we did was go figure out, well, what engines are we going to put on this thing? It's obviously going to be a big airplane. The D model, I can't remember the wingspan, was 105, 110 feet, something like that. And we were going to have more span than that. So it's going to take a couple of pretty big engines. Engine selection took 5 minutes. It took 4 minutes to find the Aviation Week Directory of Aerospace Equipment, and about 1 minute to open to the engine page, and we simply picked the biggest American-made turbofan, which at the time was the TF-33. Announced to Pratt & Whitney that you now have another small order for engines. They're going to fly at high altitude, and we need a performance deck or a set of data. We had no drawings of a B-57, save one that was in an erection and maintenance manual, and I tell you, any fifth grader could have drawn a profile of B-57 that would be as good as that illustration. It was pathetic. So I hopped on my Vespa scooter, which I got a lot of notoriety for riding to work in those days, went over to Tolson's Hobby Shop on Camp Bowie and bought a Revell B-57B plastic model kit, which turned out to be extremely accurate, and simply took half of the fuselage, laid it down on some graph paper, traced around it with a good sharp 6H pencil, and developed wetted areas and dimensions from that. Turned out it was dead on. So I did not charge that to the program. I kept it and built the model later on. Basically, the routine was come up with a configuration. I would assess the lift drag characteristics, do the drag polar on it. The structural weight estimators would look at it and say, okay, it's going to weigh so much, and then over to the performance guy, who would then basically calculate max or cruising altitude from low fuel to, or high fuel down to low fuel. What we did was we found out pretty quickly that the more wing you put on, the higher it goes. So there has to be a practical limit to that somewhere. And the wing grew to 2,000 square feet. The original, by the way, was 969, so you could see there was it more than doubled the wing area of the B-57. And however, the altitude increased at a decreasing rate with wing area. And we looked at it and decided, okay, about 2,000 square feet is all you're going to be able to stabilize with the original horizontal tail. That determined the wing area. So the next thing to do was, okay, now you fixed the area at 2,000, what aspect ratio comes out best? And we got exactly the opposite answer to Lockheed with the U-2. If you put a high aspect ratio wing on it, the weights went up enormously, and you didn't get the altitude. Besides which, it made handling very difficult. Well, you can imagine it was difficult enough with the wing we ended up with. So anyway, we ended up with a fairly moderate aspect ratio. We had a little bit of an argument with my boss. I did. I wanted the wing leading edge to be unswept. In fact, I was basically copying the Heinkel 219 wing plan form, which my theory was, we'll put the wing area up where the weight is, which is those two great big engines. He said, oh, the customer just has to have some kind of sweep. They don't want to buy any airplane with a straight leading edge if it's jet powered. And I said, well, here's my reasons. Well, see what you can do with 10 degrees sweep. Yeah, we couldn't find any real difference in drag polar in the performance of the airplane, assuming you could balance it correctly, between 10 degrees forward all the way to 10 degrees aft leading edge sweep. So we end up with 10, and to my chagrin, I found out later we had to put 30 pounds of lead in the rear end of the airplane to balance it. And that's a time when I would have given a week's pay to get another 10 feet of altitude out of it. It was just such an engineering challenge. And then to end up hauling a bunch of lead around just for cosmetics, it really irritated me. So I don't recall any particular stability and control problems other than we doubled the area of the vertical tail. We had a sort of a half man on the team, a stability and control consultant, would come in every now and then. Ralph McKenzie was his name, and he said, you might get away with the original tail, but if you lose one of those engines on takeoff, you'll never hold it straight. And also you're going to need some Dutch roll damping, some serious Dutch roll damping, because the wings are going to bend upward in flight, and that sharply swept wingtip you have is going to give you a lot of dihedral effects. So you're just going to have to double it. And I said, well, something like this, and just here's a basic picture of it. I just sketched something out that was about 1.4 times as wide at the bottom and as high at the top. And he said, yeah, probably they'll do it. And, as I say, I was basically off the program in September '62, and however, I was at church the morning of the first flight, and I heard those engines start up. There's no mistaking that sound. And I was thinking, oh golly, I'm going to miss seeing it. I knew first flight was pretty close, and then they shut down again. Well, I took the family home from church, jumped on the Vespa, and ran back out, parked alongside the fence, heard them start up again, and I saw the first flight. So it takes me all the way back to as a kid in Orlando, hanging on the fence at Orlando Air Base, watching a plane fly by, and this was the biggest thrill of all. The airplane ended up flying from 63 to 68,000 feet. As soon as you could climb up there after takeoff, and then toward the end of cruise, it was 68,000. Now, I had read, in all places, Aviation Week, about the U-2 with wide chord compressor blades that would fly at 100,000 feet. I just thought, oh, this is utter nonsense. No way. So now that we know what the performance of the airplane actually is, I went in and did an analysis on the U-2, the same kind of basic lift drag calculations and all that, and I could get it to 72 to 75,000 feet, and that's all. I don't believe any U-2 ever flew over 75,000 feet. When the airplane performed better than the estimates, a couple of our senior engineering types came up and said, "What's wrong with our programs? Why didn't this come out right?" And I said, I just got a little bit conservative. Apparently we got more laminar flow on the airplane than I thought we'd have, and so forth. And they were visibly relieved that their analysis program had. And by the way, this is a computer program. This is all slide rule stuff. And the funny thing is that all that group, the work that the group did, the 4 people in there, could probably be done in about a millionth of a second by a computer today. You'd just say optimize it and it would do it, but we were sitting there doing it one configuration at a time.
Amongst the antecedents of the B-57 was another high-speed twin-engine bomber from the Martin Company, the B-26. The B-26 was originally designed as a classic medium bomber to operate from fairly high levels, carrying a quite respectable bomb load, but with a shorter range than the B-24 Liberator or the B-17 Flying Fortress. But as the benefits and methods of tactical air power became more fully understood, the B-26 was also used at lower levels against key points in enemy supply lines. As the Army Air Force developed its tactical use of air power, the planes directed by controllers on the ground with troops became coordinated with the land forces as air artillery. This system developed relatively spontaneously as heavy single-engine U.S. fighters had devastated targets, often with an emphasis on the communications. Perhaps the best compromise between a heavier medium bomber like the B-26 Marauder and a single-engine fighter bomber like the P-47 Thunderbolt was the Douglas Invader. While the Marauder packed a punch, It was a large target at the low altitudes required for tactical strikes, and the Thunderbolt, for all its ruggedness, could only carry a limited external bomb load that hampered its performance. This plane was designated as an attack aircraft, given the number A-26, in reflection of its combination of a bomber's substantial internal bomb load and with the speed and flexibility approaching that of a fighter. This A for attack designation was itself significant, signaling a doctrinal shift in the Army Air Forces away from a rigid distinction between bombers and fighters. The A-26 was a purpose-built solution for a new kind of warfare. It was a superb piece of flying technology. Powered by two formidable 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines, the same engines found on elite fighters, the Invader was exceptionally fast for a twin-engine aircraft capable of speeds over 350 miles per hour. Its heavy forward firepower enabled it to strafe enemy positions with fighter-like concentration. The most feared variant featured a solid gun nose that could be fitted with up to 8 machine guns, creating a devastating wall of lead. This, combined with its internal bomb bay that could carry 4,000 pounds of bombs, meant it could shatter a target with gunfire and explosives in a single pass. Because of the proximity of the bases to enemy territory, they were within striking distance of the enemy fighters and needed their own aerial protection provided by aircraft like the P-61 Black Widow, a sophisticated, purpose-built night fighter.
By war's end, the importance of tactical air power was fully accepted, and when the Air Force was given its autonomy, a separate command was formed with this in mind, the Tactical Air Command. Of course, in the post-war years, all interest in aircraft procurement and design focused upon jet propulsion and the potential for aircraft of greater speed. To a certain extent, this tended to blind planners to lessons of the war, and a division between fighters and bombers which had existed in pre-war thinking was reconstructed.
For the mission of striking deep into enemy territory, the first operational jet bomber was coming online, the 4-engine North American B-45 Tornado. But the B-45 was a transitional machine, representing old doctrine powered by new technology. It had been designed for conventional use, to drop bombs from a considerable height while in level flight, a concept taken directly from the propeller-driven fleets of World War II. While its jet engines provided incredible speed for defense, its core design was limited. Its strategic reach was constrained, and it was shackled to the old doctrine of massed formations. The B-45 was not a surgical weapon. It was only intended to be used in large numbers to overwhelm an enemy, a costly strategy that this new age of air power was supposed to leave behind.
In battlefield conditions in Korea, again, the need for filling a gap between fighter and bomber arose, just as it had 5 years earlier in the World War. The only capable aircraft was the piston-engine A-26 Invader, now confusingly designated the B-26. Despite its ability to fill the role, it was a World War II plane doing business in the jet age. Together with the other World War II piston-engine planes, the B-26 filled the gap in Korea and provided the tactical attack needs, but at the considerable price reflecting their vulnerability. Clearly, there was a gaping hole in the plan. What was needed was the jet-powered equivalent of the A-26, and there had simply been no serious expectation or provision for this. There was one exception. The Martin Company were working on a project, the B-51, which was a plane that was clearly designed for tactical use. The B-51 employed many innovations, not the least of which was its 3-engine format, with the 2 decks attached to the forward fuselage and the third buried in the rear of the plane, just ahead of the fin. They also used fuselage-mounted 10 and main wheels and outrigger supports. Another feature was the variable incidence of its drooped 35 degrees swept-back wing. The wing could be adjusted to various positions for takeoff and flight. The outrigger wheels stabilized the plane for takeoff and landing. For the first time, powered air brakes were incorporated and a drag parachute was used to slow landings. Epitomizing the advanced design thinking was the B-51's rotary bomb door, which allowed quick ejection of the bomb load while the plane was still flying at very high speeds. In the late 1940s, the Martin X B-51 stood as the only contender for the role of filling the shortfall that Korea was to demonstrate. Powerful and highly advanced, the B-51 was clearly pitched somewhere between the fighter and the bomber. Using jet-assisted takeoff, the B-51 takes to the air in one of the hundreds of tests that were carried out within the early 1950s to try and iron out its limitations. It was by no means a perfect aircraft, and clearly, before it was successful, it would need more development. The designers had successfully identified the task for the plane, but failed to develop a concept that really could do the job. More time was needed than Korea allowed, and the Washington administration needed some option to the B-51. So, reluctantly, they were forced to consider foreign designs.
World War II had forged the United States into an unrivaled industrial titan and the world's most successful aircraft manufacturing nation. In the aftermath, a powerful sense of self-sufficiency took hold, and the U.S. military establishment had some difficulty in accepting a foreign design for evaluation. But the new pressures of the Cold War demanded pragmatic solutions, so they seriously studied Allied developments. First, it was the Canadian Avro CF-100 Canuck. This was more truly a twin-engine, all-weather interceptor designed specifically to hunt and destroy enemy bombers. While impressive in its intended role, it was ultimately unable to carry the worthwhile payload needed for the versatile bomber Intruder mission, and was set aside. Meanwhile, the British had perfected the concept of a fast attack aircraft during the war. The remarkable de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder, was exceptionally fast and agile, serving as a tactical bomber and reconnaissance platform that could outrun most enemy fighters. After the war, the Royal Air Force, fully acknowledging the enduring need for such an aircraft, formally sought a jet-powered replacement for the legendary Mosquito, issuing a requirement for a high-altitude, high-speed, unarmed bomber. The English Electric Company had come up with the new plane, a very advanced design which is given the name Canberra. The aircraft had simple lines and combined the agility and speed of a flyer with the lifting power of a bomber. Right from the very start, the Canberras were a success, and production orders for the RAF were so large that much of the production was subcontracted to other aircraft manufacturers. The classically streamlined Canberras, robustly designed with their powerful Avon engines, were a formula for success. However, interest from the United States was initially muted. There had never been a true equivalent American type to the Mosquito Edict. But the view of the Korean experience interest grew considerably because the English Electric Company's aircraft offered a proven, successful design that could do the job and would be available for early delivery as the war dragged on. The U.S. Defense Department, recognizing the urgency of the situation, bypassed a lengthy development cycle and started direct negotiations with the British government about producing the English Electric Canberra in North America. Given the Glenn L. Martin Company's recent work on its own advanced but complex B-51 bomber prototype, it was that company that was seen as the most capable partner. The deal was struck, and Martin was duly licensed by the original British designers to produce a modified version of the aircraft for the United States Air Force. The arrival of the Canberra was a powerful statement. In March 1951, after a stunning, record-breaking transatlantic flight without refueling, the first of 2 British pattern aircraft landed at the Martin plant in Baltimore, Maryland. For the proud British aircrew and their impressed U.S. hosts alike, it was a truly memorable occasion. The event was heavy with historical significance, not since the de Havilland DH-4 of World War I had the mass manufacture of a foreign-designed combat plane even been contemplated by the American industrial machine. Now, the unthinkable was happening. With the newly designated B-57 Canberra coming into production, the critical gap in the U.S. inventory for a high-speed tactical bomber and reconnaissance platform would finally be plugged. While the Canberra arrived too late to see service in the Korean War due to the lengthy conversion process, it was to prove the wisdom of its purchase and its immense worth in combat for decades to come, particularly over the skies of Vietnam. For the Martin Company, the contract was more than just another order. It was a corporate lifeline. In the preceding 4 years, in the absence of major military orders, Martin had diversified with some early success into domestic airline manufacture. However, subsequent airliner models had failed to compete with rivals from Douglas and Lockheed, placing the company in a perilous financial position. The future of its Baltimore plant hinged upon securing this government requirement for a high-speed, lightweight bomber. The path from British blueprint to American reality, however, was fraught with difficulty. Tragedy struck early when the first of the 2 British models crashed during testing, killing the navigator and underscoring the risks involved. It was left to the second pattern aircraft to carry the immense burden of the entire flight testing program. The process of converting the design, known as Americanization, proved to be a monumental engineering challenge. There were far more problems to be solved than anyone had anticipated in making the transition from British to American standards. Even simple basics, like the size and threading of nuts and bolts, differed completely. But the alterations went much deeper. The British electrical system had to be ripped out and replaced with a U.S. standard 28-volt system. The British Rolls-Royce Avon engines were swapped for more powerful American Wright J65s, which required redesigned engine nacelles. The bomb bay had to be reconfigured to carry American ordnance, and the cockpit was redesigned for a 2-man crew instead of 3, incorporating new American instrumentation. It was to be over 2 long and arduous years before the top brass would be able to assemble to inspect the very first B-57 off the Baltimore production line, a testament to the immense challenge of translating one nation's masterpiece into another's arsenal. When the first U.S.-built B-57A aircraft appeared, they were, at first glance, almost identical to their British cousins. The sleek lines and distinctive shoulder-mounted wings were a direct copy of the English electric design. However, beneath that familiar skin lay major technical differences that defined the new American variant. The most significant of these was Martin's incorporation of the advanced Rotary Bomb Bay, a concept borrowed from their own B-51 prototype. This system preloaded ordnance onto the door itself, which then rotated 180 degrees into the slipstream for a near instantaneous release. It was a dramatic improvement over conventional bomb bays, minimizing drag and aircraft buffet, which allowed for far greater accuracy at high speeds. The second major change was the replacement of the British pattern aircraft's Rolls-Royce Avon engines with more powerful, American license-built Armstrong-Siddeley Sapphire engines designated the Wright J65. A defining characteristic of these early jets, however, was their dramatic startup sequence. The J-65 engines were ignited using an explosive cartridge starter, which produced a loud bang followed by a characteristic belch of thick, acrid black smoke. Though U.S. engineers worked on improving these starters, there was always a notable exhaust plume when the plane came to life. It was a tactically displeasing trait in an otherwise tidy airplane, as the signature smoke cloud could easily give away an aircraft's position on a forward airfield. On the wing of the prototype, a long instrumentation boom housing the pitot tube could be seen, packed with sensors to gather the precise flight test information needed to validate the new design. Generally, these first B-57A models differed little externally from their UK counterparts, although this faithful similarity was destined to change dramatically in a very short time with subsequent versions. The crew arrangement was a direct legacy of the British design. Under the large bubble canopy sat the pilot, who had an excellent field of view. Behind and below him, in a more claustrophobic station, was the navigator. This second crewman had a demanding dual role, doubling as the bombardier. To aim and release the weapons, he had to leave his navigation instruments and undertake a perilous scramble, crawling through a narrow tunnel into the transparent perspex nose cone. From this exposed position, lying prone, he would guide the aircraft to its target. If you look carefully at the top and bottom surfaces of the wing, you can see the rows of small rectangular slats. These are the unique finger air brakes which extended directly into the airflow to allow for rapid deceleration or a controlled steep dive, a crucial feature for a tactical bomber and again, a design identical to the British version. As the early B-57As went into service, many of them received a coat of the gloss black, non-reflecting paint that had been developed for the World War II-era P-61 Black Widow night fighter. This was simple but effective anti-searchlight technology designed to absorb and scatter the beams of enemy searchlights rather than reflect them. Much of the original U.S. purchase justification was based on the Canberra's potential in high-speed, nighttime operations, and this specialized paint made the aircraft a near-invisible phantom in the dark. While 171 of these early models were built, it was quickly acknowledged that there were flaws with the plane, some considerably more serious than the black smoke of the starter cartridge. Most important was the position of the second crew member. As the U.S. Air Force moved to turn the plane further from its original high-altitude bomber concept towards a low-level, high-speed tactical interdiction capability, the isolated navigator station became untenable. The B-57B was soon introduced, representing a radical departure that brought with it clear external differences from the British plane. Behind the wing, large, powerful fuselage-mounted air brakes, similar to those introduced on the B-51, were installed. These pedal-style brakes were also being more widely adopted by other jet designs for superior deceleration control. The placement of the two crewmen on the aircraft's centerline gave the B model more of the aggressive feel of a fighter. Crucially, it also allowed the use of conventional upward-firing ejector seats for both crew members, solving a critical safety flaw of the earlier design. However, considerable testing was needed to sort out the best arrangements before the modifications were carried through. The mock-ups of the test dummies illustrate the immense, violent pressures involved in ejection. Adding the factor of aircraft speed to the controlled explosion you see here, you will appreciate just how dangerous this process can be. The most minor failure in the design or manufacture of any component in such a system could be fatal. Most dramatically, a tandem crew arrangement had been arrived at, with both crew members housed under a single elongated canopy with excellent visibility. One feature that did not change was the starter. A new cartridge system was housed differently, though the signature black smoke continued to be part of the startup process. Despite training and briefings, it is often reported that new ground staff, seeing the sudden bang and eruption of smoke, would panic. They would immediately douse the plane with flame-suppressant foam, much to the discomfort and intense annoyance of the crew, especially if the canopy was open at the time. Ultimately, the ground crews learned to live with the B-57's explosive greeting. The cartridge system, for all its drama, was simple and self-contained, requiring no heavy ground power units. It was the aircraft's signature, a loud, smoky, but reliable announcement that it was ready for the mission. The B-57B was a true transformation, now boasting vastly increased firepower and tactical options. The new emphasis was squarely on the interdiction mission, attacking enemy supply lines and infrastructure deep behind the front. For this, the B-57B was equipped with 4 20mm cannons mounted in the wings for strafing runs, and underwing hardpoints could carry a battery of unguided air-to-ground rockets. This was in addition to an immense selection of ordnance for the Rotary Bomb Bay, from general-purpose high-explosive bombs to napalm canisters. Despite some continued reservations about its foreign origins, the B-57 was shaping up into an outstandingly versatile weapon system. It had near transonic speed and the ability to soar into the thin air of the stratosphere, far above most anti-aircraft threats. In addition, it had a remarkable agility more akin to a large fighter, and the ruggedness and sweet control response to be used in daring, low-level, ground-hugging attacks. In this role, it was seen as the true jet-powered successor to the legendary Douglas A-26 Invader of World War II and Korea. What had been an outstanding British design to start with was now becoming, with these American refinements, a truly great and formidable plane. The Defense Department's decision to persevere with the aircraft's evolution was being thoroughly vindicated. However, for all its strengths, the aircraft was not without its vices. One of the Canberra's virtues was its relatively short landing and takeoff distance for a jet of its size. But this performance came with a critical risk. Landing with one engine out could be exceptionally dangerous. Because the engines were mounted far apart on the wings, the loss of one created powerful asymmetric thrust, which could overwhelm the rudder's authority at low speeds and cause the plane to roll uncontrollably. For the pilot, it was a desperate battle against the laws of physics, a full-body workout just to keep the aircraft flying straight. They would be standing on one rudder pedal with all their strength, wrestling to counteract the relentless yawing force from the single good engine. The aircraft fought back, constantly trying to roll over towards the dead engine, forcing the pilot to make continuous, exhausting corrections with the ailerons. This created a terrifying knife-edge situation on final approach. As the aircraft slowed, it neared its minimum control speed, a critical threshold below which the rudder would no longer have enough authority to overcome the asymmetric thrust. Here, you can see the potent combination of weapons that defined the B-57B. The large, 5-inch unguided rockets, coupled with the new wing-mounted cannons, gave the aircraft the devastating forward punch of a dedicated attack platform, forever changing it from a simple bomber into a multi-role warrior. The original Royal Air Force Canberras were never fitted with wing-mounted guns, a design choice that reflected their specific doctrine as high-altitude, unarmed bombers. The British philosophy relied entirely on speed and altitude for survival, a direct legacy of the legendary de Havilland Mosquito, believing that the best way to survive was to be too high and too fast for enemy interceptors to engage effectively. However, for the B-57's designated interdiction role, the United States Air Force required a fundamental shift from a pure bomber to a versatile, multi-role attack platform capable of fighting its way to a target at lower altitudes. In this brutal tactical environment, both the cannon and the rockets were absolutely vital. The other distinct difference from the British plane's armament was the use of Martin's Rotary Bomb Bay, a game-changing innovation carried over from their own radical but ultimately unsuccessful XB-51 bomber prototype. Conventional bomb bays, with doors that swing open into the slipstream, created immense drag and violent buffeting at the high speeds the B-57 was capable of. This aerodynamic disruption could severely compromise accuracy at the critical moment of release and made the aircraft a less stable, more vulnerable target. Martin's rotary design solved this problem entirely. Instead of opening doors, the entire bomb bay was a single cylindrical drum that rotated 180 degrees with incredible speed. Ordnance was preloaded onto the interior surface of the drum while it was closed and flush with the fuselage. To attack, the drum simply snapped over, exposing the bombs to the slipstream for a clean and near instantaneous release. The practical concerns of the designers are exhibited in the bomb bay. The installation was arranged so that the whole bomb bay floor preloaded with the bombs could simply be swapped over at the end of a raid, so that the plane could quickly be turned around and sent back to the battlefield. Furthermore, this system introduced a revolutionary logistical advantage by allowing the palletization of the bomb load. Entire mission-specific pallets, whether carrying bombs, reconnaissance cameras, or electronic warfare equipment, could be prepared on the ground and then quickly winched into the aircraft as a single unit. This dramatically reduced rearming and turnaround times, transforming the B-57 into a remarkably versatile, quick-change platform that could be adapted for different roles with unprecedented efficiency on the flight line. The four 20mm cannons provided a devastating strafing capability, essential for destroying soft targets like vehicle convoys and suppressing enemy anti-aircraft fire. The powerful unguided rockets, meanwhile, offered a heavier punch. Beyond carrying conventional bombs, the B-57's versatile airframe invited more radical thinking about its ground attack role. The bomb bay was also seen as a place to mount a battery of downward-firing machine guns in large, self-contained packs. This innovative concept was designed for area suppression, allowing the aircraft to fly straight and level over a target zone, saturating it with heavy fire without performing a predictable low-angle strafing run, a maneuver which dramatically increased an aircraft's vulnerability to concentrated ground fire. By now, the B-57 had become outstandingly versatile in both senses. Outstanding in the number of roles it could fill, and outstanding in how well it did them. The plane was very robustly designed with a lighter servicing requirement compared to other planes of the time. Perhaps a little ignominiously, one of the roles that they were purposely adapted to perform was that of the target tow, admittedly a useful task. Painted bright orange to hopefully minimize the chance of being mistaken for the target, the E model was equipped with the powered cable drums in the bomb bay to trail large fabric targets from canisters in the tail section. The targets, understandably disposable, were used in training fighter pilots filled much with the same way as the flag when they were installed on a plane. Certainly not the most glamorous of jobs, nonetheless, this required a certain fatalistic courage from the pilot. So the once feared bomber became the perfect bait. It was a strange, thankless duty to fly as a target for the very fighters you might one day fly alongside in combat. The pilots knew that every training sortie was a live-fire gamble, where the only prize for winning was simply getting to land again. As the B-57 bomber was proving its versatility in the tactical role, an entirely different and far more secret requirement was emerging from the highest levels of the U.S. government. In the tense, paranoid atmosphere of the early 1950s, the Cold War was a conflict fought in the shadows, fueled by suspicion and a desperate need for intelligence. President Eisenhower's administration was haunted by the fear of a bomber gap, and soon a missile gap. They needed to know the true state of Soviet military power, but the vast, closed-off territory of the USSR was an intelligence black hole. The only conceivable way to get answers was to fly over it. For this mission, a new kind of pilot and a new kind of plane were needed. The official, long-term solution was already in development. The Air Force and the CIA had committed themselves to the Lockheed U-2, placing immense expectations on its value as a strategic reconnaissance platform. A product of Lockheed's legendary and highly secretive Skunk Works, led by the brilliant engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, the U-2 was an aircraft unlike any other. With its enormously elongated high aspect ratio wing, the U-2 was virtually a jet-assisted glider. Every ounce of excess weight was stripped away, sacrificing structural integrity, speed, and conventional handling, all for one singular purpose: altitude. Its mission was to carry highly sensitive cameras and reconnaissance equipment to a height then considered to be completely beyond the reach of Soviet fighters and their fledgling surface-to-air missiles. The theory was simple. By flying above 70,000 feet, the U-2 would be a ghost in the stratosphere, untouchable and invisible. For a long time, the U-2 project was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War. This is where the Canberra's story takes another unexpected turn. While the role of the U-2 is now well known, less so is the incredible fact that as the intelligence community grew more desperate, Martin Company engineers in Baltimore were working against the clock on a top-secret program of their own. Their mission? To convert the standard B-57 Canberra bomber into a viable interim spy plane. The project resulted in the RB-57D. This was no simple modification. Martin engineers took the robust Canberra airframe and performed radical surgery. They replaced the standard 64-foot wings with a massive, newly designed wing spanning an incredible 106 feet, dramatically increasing the lift needed to operate in the thin upper atmosphere. To power the aircraft to these new heights, they removed the standard Wright J-65 engines and fitted more powerful J-57s, the very same engines destined for the U-2. The fuselage was reconfigured, stripping out all combat equipment and replacing the bomb bay with pallets for cameras and electronic sensors. In essence, they created a completely new aircraft, a high-altitude hybrid that blended the soul of a British bomber with the heart of an American spy plane. This secret Canberra became the crucial stopgap, flying dangerous reconnaissance missions on the periphery of the Soviet Union and over other hostile territories, bridging the intelligence void until its more famous thoroughbred cousin, the U-2, was finally ready to take flight. The Lockheed plane was late. The combining of so much revolutionary technology, from its powerful single Pratt & Whitney J-57 engine to its delicate airframe and its incredibly advanced photographic payloads, was proving to be a monumental engineering challenge. The integration was taking far longer than anyone had envisioned. In the end, the U-2 would prove to be an outstanding success, but in the interim, a critical and dangerous intelligence gap had opened. The need for eyes in the sky was immediate, and there was no plane to fill it. And so the RB-57D flew the missions the U-2 was built for, but could not yet fly. It was a case of an adaptable workhorse holding the line, buying precious time while the more specialized thoroughbred was being readied for its historic and now legendary debut on the world stage. Here in flight, the dramatic contrast between the two aircraft is starkly evident. The standard B-57, with its relatively short, powerful wings, is dwarfed by the immense, graceful span of the high-altitude reconnaissance RB-57. The standard Canberra wing assembly was a masterpiece of conventional, robust engineering. Overbuilt to withstand the high-stress rigors of low-level attack and combat maneuvering, these wings were so sound that they provided many years of fatigue-free service. The spy planes regularly made unobtrusive and extremely high-altitude flights along the borders of Soviet territory, their high-technology black boxes installed behind the pilots and silently gathering information. For these probing scans of Soviet defenses, pilots were carefully selected and briefed. These were high-stakes tightrope walks. A single mechanical failure or navigational error could result in an international incident or the pilot's capture, with no hope of rescue. The usual mission saw a climb to around 60,000 feet prior to approaching enemy airspace. After that, the pilot proceeded to use a specially built periscope to scan below the plane to see where he was. At that height, his forward view was of the very distant curve of the horizon, floating in a deep violet sky on the lonely edge of space. The whole concept of high-flying aerial spying was still in its infancy when the B-57 first came into production. Before this, strategic reconnaissance meant using converted bombers at altitudes that left them increasingly vulnerable to new jet interceptors and radar. Even the operational equipment seems primitive by today's standards. There was no GPS. Navigation over thousands of miles of hostile territory relied on celestial fixes and dead reckoning. The intelligence wasn't digital data, but images captured on massive film cameras whose delicate film could freeze and crack in the extreme cold of the stratosphere. This physical film then had to be flown home, developed, and painstakingly analyzed by armies of photo interpreters. To place the stunning achievement of the B-57 into its proper perspective, one must first revisit the pinnacle of World War II aviation. In 1945, the mighty B-29 Superfortress, operating at its ceiling of 30,000 feet, was all but out of reach of Japanese defenses. At this altitude, the air was thin and brutally cold, pushing its revolutionary supercharged piston engines and pressurized crew cabins to their absolute limits. For the airmen of the day, 30,000 feet was the very edge of the world, a hard-won sanctuary that made them largely immune to enemy fighters and flak. And yet, in the furious technological crucible of the Cold War, that benchmark was shattered. Under a decade later, the specialized Canberras were being designed to operate in an entirely different realm. They were comfortably maintaining a height twice that of the Superfortress, soaring for hours in the silent, near vacuum of 60 to 70,000 feet. This was a quantum leap, made possible only by the jet engine, which thrived in the thin, cold air that choked its piston-powered ancestors, and by radical, glider-like wings that could find purchase in an atmosphere that was barely there. As testing and evaluation progressed, the massive, delicate wings of the high-altitude spy planes had to be constantly maintained and rebuilt. The immense stress of climbing to and operating in the stratosphere took its toll, and eventually, metal fatigue forced the retirement of these unique Canberras, with the U-2 taking over their missions. However, remarkably, years later, other Canberras were taken out of mothballs and radically modified with an even larger 122-foot wing to become the B-57F. Powered by two main TF-33 turbofan engines supplemented by two additional J-60 turbojets, this four-engine giant could soar to even greater heights. The B-57F was ostensibly for weather reconnaissance, a perfect cover for its true clandestine purpose: monitoring atomic bomb tests, using its capabilities to sample the air for the radioactive isotopes that were the fingerprint of a nuclear detonation. Although it is known that the Soviets succeeded in bringing down U-2s, there is no record of either of the two remarkable big-wing Canberra models being lost to hostile action. Enemy fire did, however, take its toll on the conventional B-57s when they were finally deployed to their original combat duty in the skies over Vietnam. By 1964, the first B-57s were based at Bien Hoa Air Base near Saigon. Tragically, the very first combat sortie saw two of the jets collide in bad weather, a grim introduction to a new kind of war. From here, they flew punishing low-altitude interdiction missions for which they had been prepared. Too late for the Korean conflict that had defined their role, they were a most timely presence in Vietnam. Although by now they were over 10 years old, the strength of their airframes and the common sense of the basic design still held them in good stead over enemy forces, as they struck Viet Cong strongholds throughout what theoretically was still South Vietnamese territory. Often working in close cooperation with forward ground control, the Canberras essentially acted as on-call airborne artillery. A forward air controller embedded with troops on the ground would identify a threat and use a sophisticated control network to vector the loitering B-57 directly onto the target for a swift and devastating strike. The key to this precision was a lethal aerial ballet, combining low-tech observation with high-tech firepower. First, daring forward air controllers flying low and slow in vulnerable light aircraft like the Cessna 01 Bird Dog were used to locate targets hidden by the jungle canopy. Once identified, they would mark the position with white phosphorus signal rockets. High above, the B-57 crew would use that brilliant plume of smoke as a beacon, allowing their cameras and sensors to lock on and home in for a devastatingly precise attack. There is no doubt about the value and effect of the presence of the B-57s in the American air war over Vietnam. Operating as relentless night intruders, they prowled the dark skies over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, delivering precise, devastating attacks against enemy supply lines when they were most vulnerable. But the Canberra's luck, and that of its crews, was not always in. Their arrival in-country represented a significant escalation of American air power, and with it came a sense of confidence, perhaps overconfidence, in the security of major installations. That confidence was shattered on Halloween night 1964 during their first year in Vietnam. Under the cover of darkness, a small team of Viet Cong commandos infiltrated the perimeter of their base at Bien Hoa, just outside Saigon. They carried mortars, and they had a perfect target in their sights. The B-57s, recently arrived and vital to operations, were parked wingtip to wingtip out in the open, a neat, orderly line of advanced bombers presenting an easy target to the guerrillas. Just after 9 p.m., the night erupted. The sudden sickening thumps of mortar rounds leaving their tubes were followed moments later by devastating explosions that walked methodically down the flight line. Secondary blasts ripped through the air as fuel tanks and ordnance cooked off, turning the supposedly secure tarmac into a chaotic inferno. When dawn broke, the scale of the disaster was laid bare. These losses had to be made good with aircraft transferred back into service from the Air Guard after updating. However, none were as advanced as the ultra-high technology G model. This variant drew on the hard-won experience of the venerable B-26 Invaders, which, in their third war, had been used for nighttime attack in Vietnam. The Air Force employed a few Canberras to test new technology, aiming to identify and disrupt nighttime Viet Cong activity along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In 1969, 16 B models were returned to the Baltimore factory for this extensive modification. The Canberras designed in the 40s, modified during the 50s, and in service in the 60s, now found themselves state-of-the-art in the 70s. The large modified nose housed the revolutionary technology suite, a combination of low-light television, infrared sensors, and a laser designator. Curiously enough, though the installation lowered the top speed, it actually enhanced the overall stability of the plane, making it an even steadier weapons platform. That only one of the 16 B-57G Tropic Moon aircraft was lost in combat is a testament to the program's success. More than just a bomber, it proved the concept of a dedicated all-weather night hunter. It provided aircrew with a lethal facility they had never enjoyed before. Huddled over their glowing screens, weapons systems officers could now pierce the darkest jungle night using low-light television and infrared sensors. They could find a single truck on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, lock onto it, designate it with a laser, and guide a smart bomb with surgical precision. A capability that was simply science fiction just years earlier. The cost of providing these innovations was incredibly high, both in the initial labor-intensive conversion of each airframe and in the constant maintenance the new systems required. The sensitive first-generation electronics inside the sensor nose were delicate and demanded specialist care, a significant logistical burden in the field. Furthermore, the bulky nose created substantial aerodynamic drag, degrading the bomber's once nimble flight performance. And eventually, as its highly specialized night interdiction role diminished, the G models were withdrawn from service. But their legacy was profound. The technology it pioneered, the integration of low-light TV, infrared, and a laser designator to guide the very first paveway smart bombs, was a revolutionary leap. This concept would become the direct ancestor of the advanced targeting systems used on other specialist aircraft, from the C-130 ground attack gunships to the fighter bombers of the modern era. Where the naked eye could ordinarily see nothing, the G model provided a devastating success and came as a fitting culmination to the overall B-57 project. The decision to break with the American design's only tradition had been a bold, if not controversial, step. It was a matter of necessity to fill a vacuum as fast as possible that forced the Air Force to acquire what was undoubtedly the best available aircraft for the job. But it is equally true to say that the modifications identified and perfected by Martin and the Air Force made the B-57 a very different plane in the long run from its British and Commonwealth equivalents. The basic airframe carried those modifications into use in a way that makes the family of Canberras deserving of the title Great Plane. In the shadows of the Cold War, it was a ghost that didn't officially exist. Known to its top-secret Lockheed designers only as Project CL-282 and later as the U-2, it was a fragile, jet-powered glider built for one purpose: to fly higher than any threat, becoming, for a while, America's untouchable eye in the sky before it was shot down over the Soviet Union on the 1st of May, 1960. This is the restored video of the story of the prototype's development in what today is known as Area 51. Where did it come from? Let's follow this transport plane and find out. This is the desert of western Nevada, already well known for its nuclear tests by the Atomic Energy Commission here at Yucca Flat. Adjoining this AEC test site is an active aerial gunnery range. Early in 1955, by presidential order, 60 square miles of this prohibited area were set aside for a special purpose. There's a narrow air corridor to reach this spot on the map. Air charts order close to all personnel and aircraft except on orders from the Chief of Staff, U.S. Air Force. The name of this isolated spot in Nevada is Watertown, and its very isolation is of the greatest importance. The specialists that come off this transport are hand-picked. They are checked every time they arrive at Watertown. Overall security in this area is the highest yet to be maintained in this country, even higher than that of the Manhattan Project. Selection of Watertown was dictated by several unique considerations. The area is isolated from prying eyes by the AEC range, with lethal reminders of past atomic explosions. AEC guards maintain regular patrols. Supplies destined for Watertown channel into the area through regular AEC routes. In Watertown, radio and teletype communications, the Angel is referred to as an article. Her pilots are called drivers. The geographical spot of Groom Lake is called home plate. The Angel was designed to do a single job: obtain the largest amount of reconnaissance information ever collected on any single flight. For the first time in jet history, it is possible to inspect 400 square miles with a single cartographic photograph. For the first time in jet history, sensitive electronic equipment is being carried to heights where it can search for any number of radio, TV, or radar signals and record this information for detailed analysis. There are already 12 alternate equipment loads for the U-2. Development of the Angel and the information gathering equipment that it carries is the result of the most experienced judgment applied at every critical point. A select group of capable, dedicated men in industry and government working with trust and cooperation completed this specific project at the utmost speed. The idea for the Angel itself was born when Lockheed started a design study on the maximum altitude possible from a jet airframe for reconnaissance purposes. The Angel, then called the CL-282, took sufficient form to be presented as a proposal. Members of the Killian Committee, a portion of the scientific advisory group, defined the technical feasibility and urgency of the program. The optical and photographic concepts were envisioned by Dr. James Baker and Dr. Edwin H. Land. The original CL-282 proposal was then modified to produce even more spectacular results. On December 9, 1954, the go-ahead was given, and Lockheed's chief engineer, Kelly Johnson, called together his tiny 26-man Special Projects Engineering Group. Here were the problems they faced: to design, build an airplane, and fly it in 8 months. An airplane that would cruise well above 70,000 feet, one that would travel almost as far as a B-52 and remain in the air for 10 hours. A plane that would be completely reliable with forced landings out of the question. A plane that would be the world's most stable aircraft for high-altitude photography. A plane that would be flexible in concept to carry at least 12 different equipment loads and have no one penalize the others in weight. A plane that would weigh only 1 1/2 times the weight of the power plant. Weight was the critical factor in the whole project. Designers said they would trade their collective grandmothers for 10 pounds of empty weight. Pounds, in fact, were called grandmothers. But weight could not be saved at the expense of reliability. A real engineering challenge met with proven know-how and a basic design so simple that it was almost revolutionary. The Angel is simplicity itself. All control surfaces are cable-operated. The tail section of the fuselage attaches with only 3 bolts. The inside of the 80-foot wing is just 4 big fuel tanks. The interior of the fuselage is plain and uncluttered. The cockpit canopy, stressed to handle a pressure differential of 5 pounds per square inch, is operated by hand. The pant leg engine intake ducts presented a problem. At altitude, near-perfect ram air distribution was needed to keep the engine running. The final intake on the Angel gives as good pressure distribution as would be found in a power plant wind tunnel. A unique gust-relieving feature was designed into the wing of the Angel to reduce tail loads and wing bending in turbulence. The flaps tilt 4 degrees upward and the ailerons tilt 10 degrees to completely change the airfoil characteristics. During development of the Angel, Kelly Johnson met with each member of the Special Projects Group at 7 every morning. Any problems occurring on the previous day were discussed and corrective decisions were made immediately. Subcontracting was virtually impossible. 87% of the prototype Angel was fabricated in one building in Burbank. Components were run through the company's big presses at night and on Sundays, then hidden from day shift workers. The C&J Manufacturing Company, for Clarence Johnson, was formed in an unmarked downtown warehouse to handle shipments from vendors in unmarked trucks. Designers of the Angel couldn't even get into a high-speed wind tunnel, so calculations were made with computers. 50% of production took place in this building at Bakersfield. At peak production of the 50 U-2s, only 600 people were involved, just 1 man in every 60 on the Lockheed payroll. The Angels were completely assembled here, checked out, disassembled, and shrouded in canvas for airlift to Watertown. Fuel and hydraulic fluid were added for the first time at Watertown, and the Angels were tested by company pilots. Because of its long, thin wings, the Angel has been referred to as a jet glider. It has the world's most efficient lift-drag ratio for powered aircraft, 25.6 to 1. That's better than many competition sailplanes. From 70,000 feet, the Angel can glide 300 miles without power. The engine for this aircraft was originally the Pratt & Whitney J57-37, a 10,500-pound thrust unit built for the B-52. A later 11,500-pound version, known as the Dash 31, was developed specifically for the Angel. Pratt & Whitney President Jack Horner and Chief Engineer Wright Parkins crammed a normal 3-year engine development program into 12 months. The new engine has a 16-stage compressor with 9 stages in the low range and 7 in the high pressure chamber. The low-range compressor is driven by a hollow shaft and turns at a lower speed than the high compressors. The Pratt & Whitney engine operates at full power for the duration of the flight. At sea level, this unit gulps nearly 9,000 pounds of fuel per hour. At 70,000 feet, this drops to 700 pounds per hour. At 74,600 feet, the engine will quit from oxygen starvation. In early stages of the program, as many as 6 flameouts occurred on a single flight. With the new fuel system and turbine design of the Dash 31 engine, flameouts have ceased to be a critical problem. An improved ignition system ensures air restarts at high altitudes. In the first 20 months that the Angel flew, logging over 5,000 hours in the air, there were just 2 forced landings away from Watertown. Both planes, equipped with the older Dash 37 engines, landed at Kirkland Air Force Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. After each development flight, a careful accounting is made of fuel consumption. A special fuel, dubbed lighter fluid, was developed by Shell Oil Company specifically for the Angel, and the finished product was shipped to Nevada in tank cars labeled LF-1A. This blend will not boil at the low pressures encountered at altitude, yet will still give adequate air starts. It is so involatile that fire seldom follows a mishap. A simple 100-gallon slipper tank has been developed to fit each wing for extremely long flights. These pressurized tanks contain enough fuel to carry the Angel to cruising altitude, where they have no significant effect on speed or range. Even after the addition of an external drag chute, 3 times the normal oxygen supply, improved braking, and an autopilot, the final all-up weight was within 10 pounds of the original proposal. The Angel exceeded original performance limits in both ceiling and range. When the prototype Angel was flown across Death Valley to Watertown, Lockheed also found itself in the transportation business. Their own DC-3 made almost daily flights to Watertown with a hand-picked crew of flight line mechanics. The first unofficial name for Watertown was Paradise Ranch. This description was dreamed up tongue-in-cheek to encourage key personnel to accept the assignment on this special project before they could be told what it involved. Anyone for golf? Many newcomers guessed that the project involved an atomic-powered aircraft and were astonished to find that they were to work with it. 2 days later, in a rainstorm, the Angel went to 8,000 feet that day. It took 5 attempts to land the plane because it would fly on idle engine thrust. The unusual bicycle landing gear designed for the lightest possible structure weighs 257 pounds. A conventional gear on a comparable aircraft would weigh 750 pounds and take room out of the wings that is vital for fuel. Wing-mounted pogos drop off during takeoff, again, in the interest of saving weight. Weight and space that paid off in an extra 1,500 feet of altitude and 100 miles in cruising radius. As the operation at Watertown grew in scope, more transportation was required. A daily military air transport shuttle system was begun with C-54s from Burbank. In bad weather, one of these transports crashed into Charleston Peak, a few miles north of Las Vegas. 14 members of the Watertown project were aboard. The program has not been without other casualties. One Angel crashed at Watertown, another disintegrated over an Indian village named Wide Ruin in Arizona. A third, with Lockheed pilot Robert Seeker aboard, disappeared near Watertown. By the time this plane was found, some information about the project at Watertown had reached the public. This is nearly 3 years after its conception. That dust cloud is an actual crash. Rescue crews rushed to the end of the runway where an Angel has landed short. The pilot here was uninjured, but emergency crews take no chances with leaking fuel. Salvage operations mean that this fallen Angel will soon fly again to rejoin its sister ships already in the air. This project has had fewer mishaps and is normal with new aircraft, yet unique ground handling equipment designed solely for the Angel operates as well at this crash scene as it does on the flight line. Not all the difficulties at Watertown have come from the Angel herself. Extremes in weather, wind, sand and heat, snow, cloudburst, biting cold, an ever-present headache. But the Angels must be ready for tomorrow's flight. It's almost all work and no play for the temporary desert dwellers at Watertown. Just 72 airline miles distant is Las Vegas. However, none of Watertown's workers can visit these bright lights or the refreshing scenery. Security is just that rigid. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, volleyball, pool, a 16mm movie, and a tiny converted mess hall are just about the only diversions. Those who remain over the weekend may explore long deserted gold mines. Remnants from another era of rugged desert pioneers. Here, as seen by a few men, is what the world looks like from 70,000 feet. These scenes were photographed over Arizona by Ray Gowdy, one of the 5 Lockheed test pilots who have handled all development and production testing of the Angel. Training of new pilots begins with the T-33 for familiarization flights. The pilot must be able to hold the T-bird inches in the air for the length of the lake so that he will be able to hold the Angel at the same altitude until its broad wings lose all their lift. This mastered, he graduates to the Angel and transition landings on the dry lake. A chase car and chase plane, both with two-way radio, are used during this phase of training. Seat belts in the chase car are good insurance. The new Angel pilot makes at least 3 landings with the pogos installed. She's a little easier to handle that way. Takeoffs are smooth from Groom Lake. A wide circle as the chase plane plays Follow the Leader. Now turn in on final approach, says the instructor in the chase plane. Your airspeed is 92 knots. The chase car pulls into line and picks up speed. He's leveling off. Just a little high. And at 72 knots, here comes the stall. The best way to land the Angel is in a full stall, just like the old-fashioned airplanes with tail wheels. The broad dry lake at Watertown makes an ideal location for this type of transition training. After the landings improve, the pogo safety pins are removed and the new pilot is on his own. Sometimes the drivers taxi right up to the hangar doors. Not bad at all for an airplane that's supposed to be hard to handle on the ground. After a number of day flights, the new Angel pilots are ready for night transition and long cross-country flights. It's no accident that the complete Angel and all its intricate cargo can be disassembled and packed quickly, ready for airborne transport. Everything about the Angel can go aboard a cargo plane. Cameras in their doghouses, engines, lab equipment and supplies, ground support equipment, and of course, the Angel. The result of foresight and planning, engineering, precise and rapid manufacture. That's it. What it is and what it can do. A vital chapter in modern American achievement. From the desert wastelands of Watertown, it's but a matter of hours to anywhere in the world where reconnaissance might be desired. The most important airplane, the most important cargo in the air today is in this single package, the inquisitive Angel.
November 3, 1955, marked the first flight of the RB-57D, a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft being produced for the United States Air Force by Martin. The chief of Martin Flight Test was at the controls when the D became airborne at 7:10 a.m. He reported satisfactory flight characteristics and noted several points. Adverse yaw predicted by wind tunnel test and aerodynamic analysis appeared to be much less than expected. The minimum control speed appeared to be less than predicted. The pitch-up expected from aileron application was not apparent to the pilot. Following initial flight, the RB-57D was placed in flight test status. Subsequent flights were made for the Martin Phase 1 program to determine preliminary aircraft stability and control characteristics. The program moved efficiently over a 22-day period. 10 hours and 36 minutes were logged in 5 flights. The D was then ready for Air Force evaluation. Phase 2 flight program for stability and control characteristics was included. Personnel from the Air Force Flight Test Center completed this evaluation on 7 December after 9 flights totaling 30 hours. The sustained flight test program was aided by an extensive ground test program. This ground program, such as vibration and slosh test, was executed as rapidly as accuracy would allow prior to first flight. The vibration test was conducted in 2 phases, the normal vibration test and a 90% limit load proof test. For the normal test, the aircraft is vibrated by vector force electromagnetic shakers. 2 shakers at each wingtip are used. Dummy engines are substituted to prevent damage to the actual engine. About 60 vibration pickups are mounted to the aircraft. Vibration characteristics received at the control and instrument panels are recorded. For the 90% limit load proof test, a method was devised of shaking the wings through a sufficiently large excursion. This introduced the required loads to the wing, with full fuel tanks. A slush test on a honeycomb integral wing tank was performed. The tank was oscillated through an arc of 30 degrees at 16 to 20 cycles per minute. Test fluid was maintained at 110 degrees Fahrenheit and 6.25 psi. Integral fuel cells were sealed with a plastic non-curing compound. After 50 hours of testing, no leaks, stains, or seepage occurred, and there were no structural failures. For increased range, aerial refueling is included in certain RB-57D airplanes. The flying boom method of aerial refueling was tested using a KC-97E tanker and a B-57B, which is basically similar to the D. The yellow paint on the B-57 simulates the eventual shape and location of the receptacle to be installed on the D. Tests revealed aerodynamic compatibilities of the two aircraft during approach, contact, and breakaway at actual refueling altitude. Data was also obtained on control sensitivity of the two aircraft. The D is now ready to move into Flight Test Phase 3. The standard Phase 3 development flight test program will correct the problems which were previously uncovered and further evaluate the aircraft performance and characteristics. Upon completion of Phase 3, the RB-57D will be ready for delivery to the U.S. Air Force.